Hello everybody and welcome to the DCS A-10C Cockpit Familiarization tutorial. This is going to be like the first in a series of tutorials I'm going to do to help you get familiarized with the A-10 and get you in the pit and proficient at systems, be it starting the jet, flying the jet, shooting missiles, dropping bombs, whatever it may be. I will try and show you how to do it. I don't claim to be an expert, but I did take the time and learn most of this stuff on my own, and figured that I would give back a little bit what I've learned to people that may be having trouble understanding it or struggling through the tutorials like I did, trying to understand all the different acronyms and system names and all that stuff. So the way I'm going to describe it to you is I'm going to show you the systems and I'm going to tell you a little about them from what I understand, so it helps you kind of understand not only what and where they are, but what they're doing and kind of the logic behind it, so you can have a good grasp of what the aircraft is doing. Find that that helps you understand a little bit more of what you're doing when you're pushing buttons and switches instead of it just being a mechanical action. So without any further delay, let's get started. This is the A-10. Everybody's familiar with the ugliest plane in the Air Force arsenal. I love it. It's one of my favorite planes. It always has been, always will be. And the A-10C has had quite a few updates from the original A-10A. Obviously, it's gotten more of a glass cockpit. It's gotten full avionics and weapon systems upgrades. It's fully capable of dropping the latest and greatest guided munitions like JDAMs and laser-guided bombs. Still retains its Maverick functionality. And it can carry a huge load and a huge range of different air-to-ground and even air-to-air ordnance. And it's just a pretty fantastic all-around jet. So without any further delay, let's get into the pit. So your first foray into the A-10 pit might be a fairly intimidating journey, just because there's a lot of stuff in here. Most cockpits in aircraft, especially military aircraft, are laid out in such a way, at least American military aircraft, that put your main controls either in your hands or up front in front of you, and then puts your secondary controls on your side panels to the left and to the right. So for the most part, you're going to be focusing on, obviously, especially with the A-10, because it's a HOTAS system, you're going to be functioning on switchology on the stick and throttle, your multifunction displays, which are the two screens on your center dash, and a couple of switches on the center console, as well as the upfront control right there. That's going to be an interface with the aircraft. Your other switches that are on your side panels, like I said, they are used mostly during startup and shutdown, and backup navigation, backup radio, and that kind of thing. So, with that kind of understood, I'm going to go over the main sort of sections of the cockpit, and then I'm going to go back through it and go over each panel in detail and tell you what everything is doing. So in the A-10 cockpit, obviously we have our left-hand console over here. We have our center dash, which is where most of our avionics instruments and flight instruments are located, as well as our two MFDs. We have our HUD right above, which is a heads-up display. And if you're not familiar with what the heads-up display does, is at-a-glance information, speed, altitude, attitude, pitch, roll, vital navigation information, vital weapons targeting information for the pilot at a glance, so he doesn't have to take his head out of looking around and go heads down in the cockpit. So the HUD is something that you'll learn and realize to be something that is extremely important in being able to efficiently use the aircraft. We also now have the right-hand side panel. This consists mostly of avionics systems and lighting and environmental controls over here. So that's the basic overview. of the cockpit. Now we're going to go through it, and I'll run through the systems for you so you know where everything is. This isn't going to be a completely comprehensive walkthrough of every system. It's just going to show you where everything's at, so you know, in later tutorials or whatever you need to know, you can go, oh, well, I know where that system is. It's on the left-hand console, or it's on the right-hand console. So it's pretty quick and easy. So let's get started over here. I'm going to get my track IR down here, and I'm going to pause it just so we don't have to battle with it. Alright, there's track IR paused, left-hand panel. So, starting from the back and moving forward, we've got this big red switch over here. That's a ground weapons ground safety switch. Basically, that takes the ground safety off your weapons. It's used for testing on the ground, obviously, but you can imagine other fun, silly things to do with it in the sim. Just ahead of that is a panel with 3 switches. Those are antenna elevation or on and off power switches for different antennas, not implemented in the sim, so you won't have to worry about that. In front of that is going to be your stall and peak performance warning buzzer volumes. So when you're doing hard maneuvering, you'll get some tones in your headset when the plane is at peak performance and when it is in a stall or about to stall. And you can adjust the volume of those alerts here with these 2 knobs. Just forward of that is the intercom panel. This is where you select your intercom channels and volumes for talking with your ground crew and other radio related stuff. You don't use this usually. It's usually set to what it needs to be. You don't have to mess with it. Just to the right of that is your KY58 secure communications radio. This is the encrypted radio systems they use in US. I'm not sure NATO or if it's just US, but it's an encrypted radio system, and it's not an implemented system in this aircraft because obviously we don't have any need for encrypted radio transmissions, but it is there. Just forward of that, running all the way up to almost behind your throttle, is your radio suite. It consists of 3 different radios. You have up front the VHF AM radio, so very high frequency AM radio. In between that, or to the after that, excuse me, you have your UHF radio, and its channel controls here, as well as its mode selectors. And then you'll see you have an identical VHF radio to the rear. You'll see it's identical to your VHF AM radio, except the knobs are different color. This and the frequencies are different. This is your FM radio, so VHF, FM, or Fox mic. So that's your 3 radios you'll be using. They're all clustered nicely together. Just outboard of that, outlined in bright yellow caution sticky tape, is your what is it called? Your manual flight reversion, emergency manual flight reversion panel. This is basically emergency manual trim and manual flight reversion options. So if you take damage and you need to trim the aircraft and your hydraulic systems are damaged, or you need to disconnect an aileron because it's stuck, it gives you the different options to do that for ailerons, rudder, elevator, and then manual trim input. Just forward of that is your IFF switch, or IFF and SIF panel. That's not implemented in this game, other than it's always on and everything knows if it's friend or foe. So there's really no need to mess with this panel at all. Just ahead of that is your SAS panel. This is the dampening and it's a hydraulic dampening and flight control dampening for when you're using the GAU 8. It will adjust or dampen your pitch and roll inputs so you can keep a steady target. It basically steadies the plane for shooting the gun, among other things. Just outboard of that, just after the throttle, you have a small panel here with a couple of switches. Hard to see. Let me move the throttle out of the way here for you. Don't start rolling. We've got, this is the LASTE panel, or the low altitude safety target enhancement panel. And basically what it is your autopilot mode selection, engage, disengage autopilot, as well as some, your ground radar, ground GCAS, ground collision avoidance system, as well as the EAC, which is part of the navigation system. Basically what it's doing is giving you more info on your relationship to the ground, as well as giving you autopilot interface functionality. Just ahead of that is our throttle quadrant. Obviously, you saw me move the throttle just now. On that panel, we have our landing gear silence button to silence the landing gear warning. We have our APU switch, which you'll learn about in the startup tutorial, as well as some engine fuel flow and motor controls. Outboard of that, this is a legacy panel for some navigation and testing. There's also some test light buttons on here, fuel test light buttons as well. You don't usually use this. There's a couple of these test buttons you'll use during startup if you want to be super legit, but the rest of these are not implemented. Forward of that is the emergency brake handle. This is a one-shot emergency brake pull handle for obviously emergency brakes, or if you're landing and you need extra braking, or your brakes are out, your normal wheel brakes are out, you can pull this to get your plane to slow down. Just forward of that is your seat up and down control. You can actually raise and lower your seat. And then just forward of that we have the, or not forward of that, but inboard of that, and just before we get to the main center dash, we have our fuel flow and auxiliaries panel here. This is basically how you manage your fuel. We've got our fuel door, aerial refueling door, receptacle door control lever that opens and closes the slipway door for the refueling probe. We have fill disable switches, so when you're filling in flight refueling and you're filling your tanks, you can select which tanks you want to fill. We have a receiver light, some other lighting options up here for fuel, as well as some fuel selection switches and our fuel booster pump switches. These you'll use in startup. These ones you'll use rarely, and usually if you have a fuel system problem or take damage. So now I'm going to unpause the track IR and we'll go to the center console, or the center dash. Whoa. And we'll pause again. So to reorient you here, that was our fuel panel down here. And on the dash, we have, starting from the left, we'll go to the right, we have the, oh, actually I'm going to start with this guy, this box over here with the green light. I didn't cover that. That's our VTR recording control panel. We can turn on VTR recording and switch between HUD and the TGP targeting pod feeds. We can use that to record it's actually used in an external program that you can use to record HUD cam and overall flight recording stuff, so you can go back and review your flight afterwards. Starting with the center dash here, we have the landing gear panel. So we have the landing gear raise and lower lever, landing gear control lever, our downlock override in case we need to override the locked down state of the gear for whatever reason. We have our 3 landing gear status lights indicating right now that they're down in green, which means they're down and locked, fully extended. We also have our flaps readout here. We currently have 10 degrees of flaps because we're sitting on the runway ready for takeoff. And that will change obviously with the amount of flaps you have extended or retracted. Above that we have the anti-skid switch, which covers the wheels. Basically it's just like anti-lock brakes in a car. Keeps you from skidding wheels on hard brake application, because these brakes are extremely powerful. They do have to stop a jet fighter after all. To the right of that is the landing gear light, or landing lights, taxi lights switch. So that's 3 positions: off, landing lights, taxi lights. That covers the landing gear panel. Just above that, we have our left MFCD, or multifunction color display. It's able to cycle through multiple modes. As you can see, I can cycle through different pages. It's fully customizable. I'm not going to cover that right now, but it will be covered in a further tutorial. You basically interact with it via other systems in the jet and using the surrounding buttons on the bezel. Those are OSB buttons, and they are labeled 1 through 20 in a clockwise direction. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 15, and through 20. To the right of that, we have our... Actually, we'll go to below that first. Just below the MFD, we have this panel here. It's called the AHCP, or Armament Control Panel. It's basically where all the master arm switches are for the jet, how to arm up the jet, arm up the TGP, turn your laser on, as well as turn the main control, KICU computers on, and a few other small functionality stuff like HUD, color, and display, and that kind of thing. This is an important panel. You'll use this a lot when you're arming up your jet. To the right of the MFD, we have, you'll see a steering engaged light. That means our nose wheel steering is engaged. We also have a couple other indicator lights, and I don't remember what they are all supposed to say. I know one of them is a cockpit closed, or canopy latched switch that comes on when you open the canopy. Canopy, there we go. Canopy unlocked. The other one is a marker light for the ILS approaches that you could do. So when you're doing an instrument landing, it'll come up and flash at you when you've passed the different markers on an ILS approach. And there's one more, and I can't remember what it's supposed to say. I'm sure we'll figure it out before the end of the video. So below that light is the RWR. This is your radar warning receiver. It tells you of radar threats to the aircraft, be that enemy aircraft radar, SAM radar, friendly aircraft radar, everything. It'll pop up, and this will be covered in a further tutorial. Below that, we have our old steam gauge airspeed indicator, indicating in hundreds of knots, as well as a smaller dial in the center that indicates in tens of knots. So between the two of them, you'll be able to understand what your indicated airspeed is. Below that, we have a cluster of 4 small gauges. This is our backup attitude indicator. It's a backup for our main ADI in the center here. To the right of that, we have a UHF header. All of this is doing is displaying the current UHF channel, so you don't have to look down at your side console. Below that, to the left, we have a clock, digital clock, with a seconds hand click gun around the outside. Super good for making sure you're on time for your time on target, takeoff times, all that stuff. To the right of that, we have our angle attack indicator, which indicates our angle of attack. Imagine that. Down the center of our console here, we have on the top, it is called, I forget what this panel is called. It's a countermeasures panel. It's called the CMSC, or countermeasures set control. And that is going to be where you can, it's a quick readout for what countermeasure mode you have set currently, what your jammer is doing, what the missile warning system is doing, and what it's defending against, if it's defending against anything. It'll, again, your chaff and flare will be here. You know what? Let's turn the system on so you can see. So it shows your chaff and flare amounts and what mode you're in. Shows that your missile warning system is active. Our jammer is currently turned off because we have no jammer on the aircraft. And then we have some controls for the RWR screen down here, as well as volume controls for the RWR tones that you'll hear when you're flying. Below that, we have our ADI, or pitch and climb and roll indicator, artificial horizon, however you want to say it. Pretty basic. This also includes all the steering cues for ILS landings and other things that are important for instrument flying. We have a turn coordinator down here. Below that we have the HSI, or horizontal situation display. Horizontal situation indicator. Basically, this is a navigation aid. Before we had GPS, this is what we used to navigate in an aircraft. And it's a little bit complex, and I'm not going to go into what it's all about in this tutorial, but that's what it is there. It's basically a compass with some extra information on it. Below that, we have a small panel called the Navigation Mode Select Panel, or the NIMSB. And it is basically how you select what mode of navigation you're in. Right now we're in IGI navigation, which is our embedded GPS and INS navigation. We can switch between TACAN navigation or ILS navigation depending on what we need to do with the aircraft. Below that we have the TISL panel. TISL stands for Target... Oh, I can't remember. Target Indication Set Laser or something like that. It's a legacy panel that has to do with the pave penny pod that's on the nose of the aircraft, which is right there, just next to the nose gear, that little thing hanging off the nose there, with the sensor on the end of it. And it's basically how laser spots were located and locked onto before we had targeting pods on the aircraft. Below that, you can barely see it, I'll move the stick out of the way, is a fuse select panel, or fuse panel. You won't be using that. I don't even know if it's implemented in the sim. But that's what it is. Above and to the right of the center, we have our climb indication, or vertical velocity indicators, telling us how many feet per minute we are climbing in thousands of feet per minute. Below that we have our altimeter. Like any other altimeter in any aircraft, it shows you your altitude above sea level. Below that we have our engine gauge cluster. These are going to show different things about the engine: oil pressure, core RPM, exhaust gas temperature, fan speed, and I think inlet temperature as well. And then the two gauges on the bottom right down here are the APU, auxiliary power unit, RPM, and exhaust gas temperature. Above that we have our left MFD, functions the same way as the right MFD, but you can put different stuff on it, so you can have two active at once. Just to the right of that and below we have our fuel display panel. In the top, the two small gauges are your hydraulic pressure for your two independent hydraulic systems, and the large gauge in the center is going to be the fuel display panel. And I'm going to unpause so we can look at this a little bit closer. So if we jump down here to the fuel panel, get my head down that low. Track IR doesn't want to cooperate right now. Whatever, that's good enough. So you'll see that we have two gauges around the outside and a center odometer style gauge in the middle. That is indicating our two fuel systems. Obviously we have a symmetrical fuel system, two symmetrical fuel systems in this jet because there are two engines. And the right engine uses the right fuel system, the left engine uses the left fuel system. So right now we're displaying internal fuel, which is all internal fuel, main tanks and wing tanks. I mean, you can also set it to display the individual main tanks or the individual external tanks, of which we have none right now. So we can switch to main, and you'll see we're at full fuel, about 6,200 pounds or something like that, in the main tanks. And if we go to wing tanks, you'll see that we have, what is that, 3,800 pounds, something like that. I don't know. Don't feel like doing that. But you can separate it into the individual zones of the aircraft, so you can tell if you have a fuel system problem or what fuel tank is low. In a perfect world, they all feed at the same rate. And then you can see in the middle we're 10,800 pounds of fuel. Right now that's total pounds of fuel, and that's usually what you're going to be seeing when you're looking at fuel. We also have a test button here we can hold down to test the gauge. And that pretty much covers the center console, or center dash. And now we're going to jump onto the right side console. Actually, we got to finish up the top here, so let me unpause. Getting ahead of myself. So the last things I want to cover are along the top here. On the left hand side of the top of the center dash, we've got our external stores jettison for emergency jettisoning all of those stores. Keep in mind you'll keep your targeting pod, your jammer, and your air-to-air stores when you do that. We have our 3 engine fire pull handles for both engines and the APU. These will cut off fuel flow to whatever engine you pull them, so expect your engine to shut off if you pull these. They light up when there's a fire. To the right, we have our fire extinguisher switch. We have 2 bottles in the aircraft. You can pump any bottle to any engine. We just basically have 2 charges, so once you use your 2 charges, you have another fire, you're pretty much screwed. Just above that, we have our UFC. It's up front control. It's basically an interface with the aircraft. It duplicates your CDU, which is on your right panel, which we'll cover in a moment. And it's basically how you input data into the aircraft. They put this one up here to keep you heads up, so you don't have to be ducked down in the cockpit punching buttons. You can be up here still looking around and inputting data at the same time. To the left and the right of the HUD, you'll see we have a G indicator up here, indicating maximum pulled positive and negative G's, as well as your current G load. We have an angle of attack indication here. It's very good for glide slope, or a glide slope indicator. It's good for landings. Telling you if you're on the correct glide slope, if you need to increase or decrease your angle of attack. On the right, we have a backup compass, and just below that we have a readout for our in-flight refueling receptacle status. I'll have different updates depending on the state of the receptacle. So moving on to the right side control panel, right side console. Get in a comfortable position here and pause track IR again. Alright, so starting with the front and moving to the back, we have our CMSP, which is our countermeasures control panel, basically. This is where you turn on your countermeasure system, and this is where you do all your editing of your different programs. I use the stick right now. You can cycle through different programs. You're in a weird mode right now, so stand by. So you'll see it displays your chaff mounts and flare mounts, as well as the program you're in. And you can cycle through all the different chaff and flare programs in the aircraft, and you can also go through and customize those programs and set them the way you want. You can also change your mode here, and it's basically how the countermeasure system reacts to threats and whether it needs you to give it input or whether it just starts dumping flares and chaff automatically. To the right of that, we have canopy control switch, raise and lower the canopy. Just under that, we have the boarding ladder extend button. Don't push this button if you're planning on going anywhere, because I believe you have to call a ground crew to get it to retract, and nobody wants that situation. Just to the outside of that, we have our canopy jettison lever. Not sure if it's implemented in the sim or not. I'm not going to try right now. I've never had to use it. Just after that, we have our electrical control panel. This is used in startup to get power to the systems of the aircraft. Couple different switches, and we also have an emergency floodlight switch over here. That's usually, if it's nighttime, you'll use that switch first before you do anything else, so you can see what you're doing in the jet. Just inboard of that, we have our caution light panel. If there's any issues with an aircraft, and we have master caution, the associated system that's having the issue will pop up here, and so you'll have a general idea of what's going on with the aircraft. Just after that is our CDU, or central display unit, or control display unit, excuse me. It's basically the main pilot interface with the aircraft. And like I said, you can also interface via the UFC, the upfront control, which is on top of the center dash. It's basically the same functionality as this. This is just a little bit more full-featured. So basically this is the way you interface with the aircraft, and I'll cover this in another tutorial as it's quite complicated. Outboard of that is your environment control panel. Actually, it's this entire panel here. But the one thing you want to be concerned is the screen switch over here is your oxygen supply. You want to make sure that's turned on when you're in the aircraft, or if you're planning on going higher than like 10,000 feet. You can also test your oxygen gauge, as well as see the flow and all that stuff. This is all climate control, pilot comfort stuff, which you will not be using. There is a pitot heat switch here, which you will be using to keep that pitot tube warm. Or else it'll ice over and you'll have incorrect airspeed indications. After that is your lighting control panel. This controls external lighting, and this is internal lighting for your different gauges and panels and stuff. So this is where you control all the lights on the aircraft back here. Inboard of that, we have several panels. Just after the CDU, we have our auxiliary avionics panel. This is where you're going to find your power switches for your CDU and your IGI, your navigation system, as well as some steer point switches, mode switches that you'll use on occasion. And this is a page select for the CDU, which also can be used with these buttons as well. Behind that, after that, we have the TACAN panel. TACAN is our tactical air navigation panel. Uses a radio frequency and Morse code to, as well as a distance measuring equipment, to lock onto a beacon and give you range and a bearing for a certain location or of another beacon. It's basically an auxiliary, a method of navigation. I'll cover that in another tutorial as well. Behind that is the ILS panel. It's same idea as the TACAN, as it being a radio frequency, and it gives you steering information for landing in inclement weather. It's instrument landings system, and so you'll get instrumentation on your ADI on the center dash, as well as some other vital tidbits of info that you can use to land in fog or bad weather or zero visibility. Again, something that will be covered in another tutorial. Behind that we have the HARS panel, which is a legacy navigation system, and I don't know if it's implemented or not, but I've never had to use it, and I don't think I ever will. But it's there. That pretty much covers it. So that's the basic cockpit layout for the A-10C. Hopefully it wasn't too confusing. And it seems really complicated at first, but once you realize where everything is and what you use and what you don't need to think about, it's actually not a lot of stuff to remember. I thought for a long time I'd be hunting for switches. Where is that switch? Where is this switch? Nah. You learn it once you go through startup procedures a couple times, you're pretty familiar with the aircraft. It's the electronic switch systems, and once you get into the MFDs and the CDU, that gets kind of confusing. So hopefully that was clear for you guys, and if you do have any questions, leave them in the comments section. If you like these tutorials, subscribe, and I'll do some more. I'm in the process of updating all these videos to be a little bit more cohesive, and hopefully they'll all turn out decent, and you guys will be able to learn something from them. So hopefully this taught you something new, and again, like, subscribe to the channel, let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.